Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we are back once again with the Samsung T5 because I just got another one in from the Amazon Vine program the other day. This one is actually performing better than the one I reviewed, and the only difference between the two is that this top one here is a 500 gigabyte drive, whereas the other one we looked at was 250 gigabytes, and I am seeing better sequential write performance out of the 500 versus the 250. I'm going to show you those differences here in just a second and make a recommendation that if you can afford the extra $80 or so to go up to the 500 gig drive, I think it's worth doing that, especially if you're doing video capture. You're going to see much more consistent write performance, especially when you are writing out to the drive sequentially. Now, I do want to mention in the interest of full disclosure that I paid for the 250 gigabyte version with my own funds. However, just the other day, the Amazon Vine program sent me the 500 gigabyte version free of charge. However, all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, and no one is reviewing this content before it is posted. So to recap my concerns with the 250 gigabyte drive is that you'll see a really decent write performance here when it first starts writing, but that performance will quickly tail off as more load is placed on the drive. So you can see here we're ending the first cycle of this test at about 434 megabytes per second. Our reads are very nice here at 506 megabytes per second. But when this test cycles again, you're going to see that performance drop off pretty substantially here. And that is because once its cache gets filled up, it has to slow down to keep up essentially. And this was a little behind the performance that we saw on the prior generation T3. However, the 500 gigabyte version performs a little differently. So let me pop this drive out, plug this one in, and we'll see what the differences are. All right, so the 500 gigabyte now is attached to my Mac here. We'll go back over to our screen and select that drive for our next test here. What this test does is it writes a 5 gigabyte file and then immediately reads it back. It doesn't really give the drive enough time to get its cache caught up before the next operation starts. And this really is a great test. It's from Blackmagic Design to measure how well a drive might do for video capture, which is something that some folks may want to do. So you can see the reads here are just slightly faster. The writes are about the same speed on the first test iteration here, but when we cycle back to begin writing to it once again, you'll see that we're not going to get that drop off here. And I let this run for about a half hour last night, and it really stayed consistent as those tests were running. And I'm guessing there must be some advantages here to the 500 gigabyte drive. Maybe it's got 2 chips on there versus 1, so it can distribute the load here as it's writing to it. But even though we're seeing a very small reduction in performance here on the write speed, it is maintaining itself at around 470 megabytes per second. Now, if you're curious about random read and write performance, the 500 gigabyte drive performs identically to the 250 on the Crystal Disk Mark test that I run in Windows. So it looks like the big differentiator here beyond the additional 250 gigs of storage is that you're going to get more consistent long-term sequential write performance out of the 500 versus what you'll see out of the 250. And again, you're not paying all that much more to get double the capacity. So again, I'm going to recommend the 500 over the 250, but honestly, if you're just doing some video editing and maybe some document or photo storage or something like that, either one of these drives is going to do very well for you. I really like these, especially because they're so rugged. Their random read and write performance is class leading, at least of the drives that I have tested that are similar to this one. So it's good for booting up alternative operating systems and that sort of thing. And what's really cool is that when you're out in the field with these, you get essentially the speed of a RAID array with something that can survive a lot of abuse. And I often edit video on trains and buses and everything when I'm out in the field, and these things are really an important part of my toolbox because they're so fast and so reliable. So I can definitely recommend either capacity, but again, if you can afford an extra $80 or so, go for the 500. This is Lon.TV, thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including gold-level supporters, the Tangential Soup Podcast, and Chris Allegretta. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.